So today I'm going to talk about my editing process because I'm kind of in the middle of editing Perheolid, book 3. And I have this system that I've been using for several years now, especially as I've been taking a more serious approach to writing. Like with Embassy and Resonance, I was very, very serious about these books as compared to my previous books years and years ago when I was in high school and even beyond that. I wasn't so serious about them. But now that I am like trying to make an impact with these books, to really get these out to readers, my editing process is a lot more refined and a lot more structured than it used to be. And I take way more time editing and put a lot more concentration, a lot of focus of detail, and I break them down into steps. I break the process into steps that I've been using for about the past 4 years now. And the process that I do use, I kind of gave it a fancy name. It's called the inverted pyramid of revising a book. And throughout this process, there's like 7 steps that make up the entire pyramid, the inverted pyramid. But those steps are completely arbitrary. I do them in this order, but some steps are multiple drafts and some steps are one draft. So it's not like if you follow this editing process that you'll have 7 drafts. These are 7 things that you should really be concentrating on as you edit your book. So I'm going to get started. The first step of my editing process is an obvious one, and that is finish the first draft. Who would have thunk it? A lot of people, what they do is, they'll start writing a book, they'll get a couple thousand words in, and then they'll have this great idea for a next book, and they'll stop writing that first book, and they'll jump into the second idea, and they'll write that idea for a couple thousand words, and then they'll have a great idea for a third book, and they'll jump into that, and the process goes on and on and on and on. I'm guilty of it. I have like 4, 5, 6, 7 projects that I actually started and I got like 10,000 words into them, and they were meant to be novels, but I didn't get anywhere with them because everything came back to the books I am working on right now. So yeah, getting an entire first draft finished is crucial to the entire writing process. If you don't have a first draft, what are you going to do? Basically, you want your beginning, your middle, your end, and you want some stuff that's fleshed out. You want some beef in your story. Sure, you could write the opening scene. Sure, you could write a few things in the middle, and sure, you could write the final scene. But if you don't have any extra content to work with in your book, you're not gonna be able to really have an effective process of editing. Some people write a really long manuscript and then they cut a ton of words from it, and some people go with the bare bones and then they add on to it. I myself, I have done both. Embassy used to be 151,000 words long. The first draft was that long. And as I edited it, I literally chopped it down to 76,000 words. It is literally 1/2 the length that it used to be. Resonance, on the other hand, was about 120,000 words when I finished the first draft, and I actually increased that to 127,000 words. So I think it really depends on the kind of book that you're writing, like what your writing style is, but the most important part is get the first draft done. Alright, so you have your first draft done. Yay! So then this takes us to step number 2 in the pyramid: editing the plot, the content, the scenes, and the major characters. The stuff that is on the surface of your story, the biggest stuff, not the minuscule details yet. When you're revising this part, you want to focus on the story itself. Are there logical connections between all of your scenes? Did you tell the story you wanted to tell? For me, when I first wrote Embassy, I actually ended up changing the story completely, and it turned into the story that affected me the most, and it turned out to be the story that I actually wanted to tell more than the original trilogy that I had planned. It went from a trilogy to 7 books now. And as you're going through, go through each scene, and as I like to do it, like, what could happen in all of these scenes that would make sense for the genre, that would make sense for the timing and the plot? Is there a twist you can throw in? Basically, just make sure that you're condensing your characters or adding characters where you need to. I myself in Embassy, I had several characters that I found I just didn't need. And so what I would end up doing is taking two characters that like appeared closely or had similar traits and made them into a single character, and it cut down on the cast and it was a lot more effective that way. Because sometimes we will write what I kind of call like transition characters where your main cast is like going somewhere or something and they meet someone, and then the only time they see that person is in that scene, and the person that they meet is literally just there to say, hey, I'm going to take you here, and then goodbye. So what I did when I did that, I actually had my characters going onto like a transport, and the transport would fly them up into orbit. And when they got to the transport, they met this one character who was like, hey, I'm going to be your guide for today. It didn't happen like that, but still. And then got them into orbit, and then you never saw that character again. And so I turned that character into, I deleted the character entirely, and then I didn't have them meet another character until they got up into orbit, and then that character turned out to be their tour guide. And he's actually a very important character to the series also, especially in book 3 in Periheliod. He plays a very important role. That character is Officer Larson Remit. Focus on those scenes. What scenes can you add? What scenes can you get rid of? What's extraneous? What's just word filler? Reading through your draft over and over, you want to make sure that what you're saying all adds up smoothly and that it's all relevant, or it has some impact to emotion, it has some impact to the plot, it has an impact on the characters. You don't want scenes in there, or characters, or even visuals that don't add to the experience in some way. Because sure, you can have all this amazing stuff, but if you're reading through it and it's really just kind of dragging and you're not getting much out of it, either condense it or scrap it or do something else with it. Just make sure that the experience of the story is a worthwhile one. You want your readers to be engaged, you want them to believe that this is a world that they could visit, but you also don't want to bore the heck out of them. I have done that with Embassy, and I fixed it, I hope. I hope I fixed that. In this step, also still the second step, with your surface characters and stuff, there are lots of stories that you read where the character, for some unknown reason, does something that they as a character or no sane person would ever do in that situation. They would say something, they would do something, and it just doesn't make sense, and you can tell that the purpose of it is just for shock value, or just to add some excitement when there was no excitement, or something that is just, it makes you roll your eyes, and it's like, why the heck would you do that? It just doesn't fit either the character or the scene, and I personally am not a fan of that tool, I guess you could call it, because it's kind of a tool. I like the logic. I like characters doing things that they would actually do. I'm not going to present a situation or have a character do something without something leading up to that would force their hand in that way or force that situation. It's something that's just very overdone, I think, and that's what I try to clean up from my own stories if I have it in there. Like for Periheliod, there's something I'm still very on the fence about, and I'm going to try to develop it more so it makes more sense. And if I can't get the proper lead up to it, it will actually change the story as a whole, but I think it will be for the better because I'm not one who likes shock value. For the sake of shock value, it needs to have an impact on the characters, the story, and the experience. Step number 3 in my editing process: world building, characterization, and honing in on the plot points. So this is kind of where after you've dusted off some things, like smoothed out the overall story, smooth out the experience of the story on the surface, and now you're trying to engage the reader more, you're trying to engage yourself more, you're trying to develop the characters and the world in a kind of seamless integration. and I'm using all sorts of synonyms. This is where you want to pay attention to the deeper aspects of your story. Figure out what events influence your characters. Figure out who they were in the world at the beginning of the story, and find ways that they can transition throughout the duration of the book so that you can see either subtle changes or drastic changes. Really, for your main characters, you don't want them to be the same that they were at the beginning of the story and then be the same person at the end of the story. You know, you want to show how the events of the story have changed them, and you don't want to just be like forced changes. Development of characters and like really learning who they are and how they react, and like who they are in society, and their worldviews and their backgrounds, and how they interact with other characters, and how other characters influence their lives. Those are all very strong ways to develop these characters more. Figure out cultures, figure out history. If you have magic in your book, figure out the magic system. This is the time to do it. Focusing on setting is a very good thing to do in the third part of the editing process, because you kind of have a better picture now that you've read your book twice or three times. At least I would have read the book twice or three times at this point. This is also a good chance to work with your secondary characters, because throughout the entire editing process, you're going to be focusing on your main characters, and they are very important to the story, but you have time to work with them. So working on your secondary characters and figuring them out and figuring their role in the story out, this is another time to do it, because to your main characters, secondary characters are part of the setting, part of the world, and so they affect your main characters or don't affect your main characters depending on their role. This is the time to work on them. You will have every single other draft to work on your main characters, so don't worry. And of course, now that you're in your third step, and you could be 2, 3, 4 drafts into your book at this point, you definitely want to be tightening up the plot. This is where you want to be tightening up the plot points. Like, make sure that the book you're writing is telling a story with a beginning, a middle, and end, with these logical connections in between. If you still don't really know what your story is at this point, that's okay. But hopefully 3 or 4 reads through, you can kind of thin it out. Well, not thin it out, but like flatten out the plot line. Like, you don't want to be going all over the place and you're like, I don't know how this gets to here and this gets to there. You want to know how your story is transitioning from A to B to C to D. This is the time to do that too. Like, make sure you know what you are doing with the story at this point. Step number 4 in the inverted pyramid of revising a book. Now we're starting to get into the more technical stuff. You can still focus on the setting, the characters, and overarching themes and stuff, but on step 4 of 7, you want to make sure that you're starting to look at the overall style of the book. Like, when readers are reading this story, you want to make sure it's clean. So this is where you start focusing on the clean aspects. Like, you start really concentrating on sentence structure, the flow of the book, the pacing of the scenes. And I'm reading off my computer, and I didn't use an Oxford comma, and I'm ashamed of that. Like, I am a very strong advocate of the Oxford comma and sentence structure, flow, and pacing of scenes. And there's no comma between flow and I give up. Anyway, so yeah, the technical aspects, the sentence structure, and the pacing. So now that the major parts of your story have been patted down, you can begin focusing on the technical stuff, and you want to start broad. As you're reading through paragraphs, as you're reading through words and sentences, do you have redundancy? Like, are there things where you kind of ramble on and you're saying the same thing in circles? Just, like you're writing a college essay. Are you doing that? Because if you're doing that, this is not the place to do it. Your readers are going to know this, and they're going to be skimming because you're saying the same thing over and over and over. And that's not what you want people to do when they're reading your book. This is the time to definitely start playing around with sentence length, commas, breaking apart paragraphs. This is where you start, you know, focusing on the construction of your words and the construction of your paragraphs, because you can write really long paragraphs and then break, and then write a really long paragraph and then break. But this isn't, 18th century contemporary literature. This is, I mean, unless you're writing that kind of story, but this is, you want something that's going to hold the reader's attention. You have to remember, readers these days get distracted easily. So if they're, reading paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, and it's just these huge paragraphs with no breaks in between, or these long sentences with no breaks in between, they're gonna get bored. It's just what we do now, and you want to have a structure of sentences and a structure of paragraphs and a structure of scenes that doesn't look like a straight block down the page. You want like the jagged lines in paragraphs and stuff, because you can use those to your advantage to slow up to slow up the to slow down the pacing, or to speed up the pacing, or to have the reader bounce thoughts in their head and stuff. And it especially works for stuff like first person, because in first person you're gonna be shooting thoughts left and right when you're reacting to situations. So that's how I write, at least. So in the book, if you have a bunch of short sentences or a bunch of long sentences, it really reflects the situation and it reflects the mindset of the character that you're writing about. For me, what I do in helping to style these sentences, if you find that you're using the word "and" a lot, I tend to just cut the word "and," put a comma. This is something that you'll actually see in newspapers. Like, this is what newspapers do. They don't say "man robs bank and runs away." They say "man robs bank, comma, runs away." The comma stands for and I use that in my books. Like, that's how I kind of break apart some of Armin's thoughts, is just with a comma, no "and." There are times I do it, use the word "and," but a lot of times, like, that's just not how he thinks. He thinks in those broken up, stuttery kind of sentences. It's not like stuttery. It's not annoying, I hope. But it's just a different way that kind of breaks apart the redundancy and the normalness of everything. So it really kind of reflects how we think, but it's not exactly how we think. You can also use sentence structure and sentence length and paragraph length and stuff to set the tone of a scene. If it's action packed and stuff, short sentences, break it down, throw in something long, break it down. It really sets up how the scene is going, what's happening in the scene. Like calmer, more relaxed scenes, that's when you're going to have those long paragraphs. That's when you're going to have those longer sentences, and you're going to be using softer language. Action scenes, somebody's angry, something is just going on. You're going to have shorter language. You're going to have harsher language, sharper language. You can see I'm doing it right now, like, because I kind of can hear myself talking and thinking at the same time. It's like I'm purposefully using different language, different words to convey the exact same thing I'm trying to tell you. That's what you want to do in a book too, is write in that kind of style. It sets up the tone, it sets up the mood, it sets up the scene. Words can do so much, and if you know how to condense them and just do what you're trying to do, it's so effective. It's so effective. Practice makes perfect. I've been doing this for 12 and a half years now. Trust me, it takes a while. And when you're doing it a lot, yeah, it's easier because you're doing it a lot. But if you're taking like year breaks between stories and stuff, like, you're going to have to get back into that rhythm. All right, so that was step number 4. Step number 5, which I'm hoping to hit in February or early March for Period, book 3. This is when you want other people to start reading your book. You want people who are going to be honest, people who, at least in my experience, this is what they want to do for a living. Like, I have 2 people who help me who want to be editors when they grow up. Yeah, like they're studying etymology and they're studying in the English language, and they're starting to do this professionally. They're starting to edit books professionally, and so like it's awesome that I have them, because I send them a chapter and it comes back blood red. Like there are comments all over the pages, and it's amazing. Like I love shredding my books. I love shredding books because it's like, if you have a page and you get it back and it's got like a line and maybe a comment, that's not helping me. That's not helping me. I want comments everywhere. I want sentences scratched out. I want stuff drawn this way, that way. I want long comments. Like the more you can rip into somebody's work, I think that's more helpful. It hurts sometimes. Yes, it does, but that's how you get better, is by seeing how your beta readers collectively edit your work. I've had both sides of the spectrum. I've had people who don't really do too much editing, and then I have the people who do a ton of editing. And what I've actually figured out that I can do is, the people who I know are just there to read the book and have the experience, those are the people I ask, how does this make you feel? Like, what are you getting out of this book? And if they're telling me that they're getting this or this or this out of the book, if it's making them happy, making them sad, and that's what I'm trying to do, that's effective. And I learn how to use my beta readers in a way that I can get the most information out of them. The people who are more technical and do most of the editing, I tell them, do the editing, do the technical stuff. The emotions I'll leave to the people who are in it more for the reading aspect. It can be annoying if you expect somebody to shred your work and then they don't. And it's like, I'm giving you a free book, please just do something. But once you figure out where everyone's strengths are, where the beta reader's strengths are, give them those specific instructions. Learn how to use your beta readers to your advantage. I have 6 or 7 people who I ask to beta read for me. Some people have like 10, some people have 2. I just have 6 or 7. Another good reason to have beta readers is to help you, is to give you a break. Because you've been reading your book, at least for me at this point, I will have read my book 5 or 6 times. This is when your brain is slipping up. You're not seeing errors. You're not seeing that you should put a comma somewhere because your brain is just scanning the lines, scanning the lines, scanning the lines. Like, after you read your book 5 or 6 times, you're going to miss so much stuff. Trust me. So giving it to beta readers and having them, just ask them to do like a chapter a week, gives you time to pull away and go do you. Send them that chapter every week. Just tell them, get this done by the end of the week. Get this done by the end of the week. And you don't have to focus on the story. You can get those, for me, it's usually between 14 and 42 weeks. So some of this can take up to a year to get revised just in the beta reader stage, and some of it takes like less than half a year. So it just depends on the length of the book then. But it lets you just, it's like finishing the first draft and then putting it away for a while. You're not thinking about it, and when you come back to it later, you're gonna have a fresh read. It's gonna be brand new to you, kind of, and you're just gonna catch a lot more. And as you're revising with the beta reader comments, you're gonna be able to coherently, no, that's not the word I'm looking for. You're gonna be able to make a better decision about what to keep and what to get rid of and how to rearrange stuff if you haven't been looking at your book for a while. So when you're in the beta reader stage, try not to read your book because you're not helping yourself if you do. And beta reading is a good way to make friends. There were a few people who I never really talked to. I just kind of was like, hey, want to beta read for me? And then they're like, sure. And then guess what? Like, we talk all the time now. So yeah, it builds friendships too, or it can destroy them. Step number 6. Cease. This is the penultimate step. It's the punctuation and the missing words. Hopefully at this point you've read your book, I'm gonna say 7, 8 to 9 times. By the time I reach like the really technical stuff in my book, I will have read my book probably 9 or 10 times. And I'm doing this all in the span of less than a year. So now you're finished all the major revisions, and your story actually kind of makes sense. Because it does. Because you've read it a bunch, and you're like, oh, this is the plot. Okay, so, this is when you do your clean sweep. Don't read too heavily into your book at this point. You've done that enough. You've really patted down everything. The scenes hopefully all make sense together. The characters are all solid. The events are happening in a logical fashion. People are reacting how they should. You've set up the world. You've developed the world. You know how the people live and interact in the world, and you've got a pretty solid grasp on everything. So you've reached step number 6, and this is where you just want to go for the tiny stuff. Just go for the punctuation. Fix up sentence structures and stuff, but pay more attention to spelling. Pay more attention to the word choice. Pay more attention to the little tiny details that are just going to enhance the experience. I truly believe that reading should be an experience. It should not be a process. Reading should engage you. It should not be something that you do because you have nothing else to do. You should want to read. You should be excited to get back to that book. You should be telling your friends all about the book. If you think it's a solid story, you're going to go back to that book again and again and again and again. And finding these new tiny things, tiny details that enhance the experience for your reader are things you want to include. Just giving them better perception, sensory enhancement, developing as much sensory perception as you can in your books will help a lot. Also, unless you're writing for super technical people, try to just write in terms that the general public will understand. Basically, you don't want your book to come off annoying, but you want it to reflect your style, your personality. It doesn't have to reflect your views because that can get messy. But if it does reflect your views, present them in a way that is objective. Make it a part of the story. Do not force it down the reader's throat. If you force it down the reader's throat, I'm looking at you, and I'm not going to say what book it is, but I'm looking at that book right there. And it was a very popular book. I'll say that. If you know me, you know what book I'm talking about. At the end of this step, this is where, read it again and fill in any holes you see, fill in any plot holes, any scene holes, anything in the setting, anything in character personalities that will just enhance the experience. Do not bog down the book. Enhance the book. If you're going to be putting in more stuff, make sure it engages. Don't just do it for the heck of it. Make sure it has a purpose. If it has a purpose, readers will love it, and at the worst, let it slide. If it's annoying, if it's just there because you could, it's why did you put it there? I'm just gonna skip it and it's not memorable. Yeah. And then the final step, step 7, is your final draft, and this is where formatting comes into play. This is where, you shouldn't have to touch the book again. This is where you're just prepping it for publication. You've been sharing that you've been writing a book with all your followers. This is the time to really get it out there, to make those quotes, make those meme quote things, or share snippets of the story or something. Don't give spoilers. Unless you really trust the person, or they've read your previous work and it's okay to share spoilers with them because you're relentlessly making them guess stuff that's going on. I'm talking to you. You know exactly who you are. And this is also the time to get it out to the media. Get it out to your newspapers. I have been in several newspapers. Get it onto your local TV stations. I've had a live interview on TV back in 2014. Hasn't happened since, but it was something. It was cool. I have the video. I've been on radio twice, again in 2014. This is all before embassy. Well, all during embassy. Marketing is crucial when you've published your book, obviously. Everyone does it differently. Everyone markets their book differently. It's very, very difficult, and I think I said this in a previous video, but whether you're self-published or you're professionally published, you're going to do most, if not all, of the marketing by yourself. And it's a skill. I have not perfected it in any sort of way. I have found things that work. I have found things that don't work. Making a website, it worked for me. It's down to the description. Sharing random snippets of quotes and stuff, some people do it effectively. Really, it doesn't work for me. It just doesn't. I don't know why, but that's just what happens. Some people make book trailers. I've made book trailers. That one's just, I just have them out there really for people to watch them. I enjoy them because I made them, but they're nothing spectacular. They're just cool. They have music. Getting people excited for your book is all part of this final step, the final draft. Let them know when it's going to be out. This is when you do your title reveal, and then a couple weeks or months later, this is when you do your cover reveal. You know, you build up the anticipation, and you do giveaways, like do contests, do guessing games. You know, I mean, you guys, if you follow me, like I do giveaways like 3, 4, 5 times a year. I give out bookmarks, business cards, books a lot, posters. That's all part of the final step of the inverted pyramid of revising a book. You can kind of see, you know, I'm just starting revising Period, book 3. You can kind of see, like, this is what my average typical page looks like. It's kind of red, just a bit. There are some pages, it's a bloody massacre. And there's some pages where I just didn't really find anything on the first go through. So then that changes sometimes, and then sometimes it's like I find a ton, and then I find nothing, and it's because I found a ton. So reading your book a lot is definitely really good because you'll just weed out things throughout the entire process. So that's the video. If you could, check out my books, Embassy and Resonance, and I will also link to them in the description, as well as the website, experiencedaliana.com, as usual. Yeah, if you have any questions, any comments, anything you want me to elaborate on, I will gladly answer all of that. And yeah, go check these out. I have a book signing coming up in Pittsburgh on December 4th from 12 to 4 at the Waterworks Barnes Noble in Fox Chapel. That's just outside Pittsburgh. Yeah, if you guys are living around there or you're in the area, come out and see me. I'll have these books for sale. They will be $12.95 for Embassy and $19.95 for Resonance, because I have to do commission through Barnes Noble. But yeah, it's a book signing, book fair for the North Hills School District. It's a charity fund, actually. Yeah, if you guys show up, come talk to me. I'm open to meeting any of you. And I will see you there, and I will see you next time in my next video next week. That's a lot of nexts. See ya!